We are taught in school that World War I started with 2 bullets fired in Sarajevo. We are told it was a tragic accident of alliances, and that the assassination of an archduke set off a chain reaction that no one wanted. But this is the version of history written for children. It is the version that ignores the cold hard economics of empire. If you want to understand why millions of men died in the trenches and why the map of the Middle East looks the way it does today, you have to look past the assassination. You have to look at a map of the world in the year 1900 and find the one thing that terrified the British Empire more than any army or navy. It was not a weapon. It was a train line. This is the story of the Berlin-Baghdad Railway. It is the story of an iron road that promised to connect the heart of Europe to the oil fields of the Middle East and bypass the British chokehold on global trade. It is the story of how the Ottoman Empire tried to escape the financial slavery of London and Paris, only to walk straight into a trap that would destroy it completely. To understand this tragedy, we must first understand the world as it existed at the turn of the 20th century. The British Empire was the undisputed master of the globe. Its power rested on 2 pillars. The first was the Royal Navy, which controlled every major ocean shipping lane. The second was the Suez Canal in Egypt. The Suez Canal was the lifeline of the British Empire, a vital artery connecting Britain to India, its most prized colonial possession. Any ship travelling from Europe to the east had to pass through this narrow waterway, paying a toll to the Anglo-French company that controlled it. This control gave Britain a strategic and economic stranglehold on global commerce. But by the early 1900s, another power was rising fast. The German Empire, unified and industrialized, was hungry for its own place in the sun. Germany's industrial might was beginning to rival Britain's, but it lacked a global empire and the resources that came with it. It was trapped by British naval power. The Kaiser's ambitions, however, were not limited to the sea. He looked east, towards the decaying Ottoman Empire, and saw an opportunity. The plan was audacious. The Germans, in partnership with the Ottoman Sultan, would build a railway stretching from Berlin, through Constantinople, across the Anatolian plains and Taurus Mountains, all the way to Baghdad and the Persian Gulf. This Berlin-Baghdad Railway was more than just a piece of infrastructure. It was a geopolitical masterstroke. It would create a seamless, overland economic corridor, a direct artery from German factories to the markets and, crucially, the oil fields of Mesopotamia. For Germany, it meant bypassing the Royal Navy and the Suez Canal entirely. Goods and troops could move from the heart of Europe to the doorstep of India without ever touching a British-controlled sea lane. For the Ottoman Empire, it was a chance at modernization and a lifeline to escape the crushing debt it owed to British and French banks. It was a declaration of economic independence. But for the British Empire, this railway was a dagger aimed at its heart. The prospect of German influence stretching deep into the Middle East, threatening its route to India and gaining access to the oil that was just beginning to fuel the world's navies, was an existential threat. British strategists in Whitehall understood that this railway wasn't just about trade, it was about power. It would allow Germany to project military force directly into a region London considered its own backyard. The iron rails were a strategic red line. The Foreign Office declared the railway a hostile act. They couldn't attack the project directly without seeming like imperial bullies, so they began a campaign of covert sabotage. British agents funded rival tribes to attack construction crews. They used their financial power to block loans and create diplomatic obstacles at every turn. The railway became a slow-burning fuse, a source of escalating tension and paranoia that poisoned relations between the great powers for over a decade. The assassination in Sarajevo may have been the spark, but the train tracks being laid across the desert were the powder keg. The war, when it came, was not just fought in the trenches of France. Its geography was dictated by oil and empire. Britain's war in the Middle East was a war for the railway and the resources it promised to unlock. While the world focused on the Western Front, British Indian forces launched a major campaign into Mesopotamia, the land we now call Iraq. The official reason was to protect Allied interests, but the true objective was to seize control of the region's oil fields and sever the southern terminus of the Berlin-Baghdad Railway before it could be completed. The city of Basra, near the Persian Gulf, was captured early in the war, not just as a strategic port, but as the gateway to Mesopotamia's black gold. The brutal Mesopotamian campaign, with its immense suffering from heat, disease, and fierce Ottoman resistance, was a direct consequence of this pre-war railway rivalry. The lives of hundreds of thousands of soldiers were gambled away in the desert to secure a future energy supply and to dismantle a rival's imperial dream. The struggle for control of this strategic corridor is written into the very borders of the modern Middle East. As the war raged, British and French diplomats, Mark Sykes, and Francois-Georges Picot, secretly met to carve up the Ottoman Empire between them. Their infamous Sykes-Picot Agreement was not a random division of spoils. It was a blueprint for controlling the post-war order. When you look at the lines they drew, you can see the ghost of the German railway. The territory designated for British control, including modern-day Iraq, Jordan, and Kuwait, perfectly encompassed the southern section of the railway route and all the known oil deposits of Mesopotamia. France was allocated Syria and Lebanon, securing the Mediterranean coast and the northern approaches. The agreement was a cynical plan to ensure that no single, rival power could ever again challenge Anglo-French dominance by building an overland route to the east. The dream of a unified economic corridor from Europe to the Gulf was deliberately shattered, replaced by a patchwork of states and protectorates designed to be managed and exploited by London and Paris. The war didn't just defeat Germany. It killed the Berlin-Baghdad Railway and redrew the map to prevent its resurrection. This story of sabotaged infrastructure and resource competition did not end in 1918. The failed railway set a century-long pattern that still repeats today. The geopolitical blueprint was simple. If a rival nation builds a strategic project that threatens your economic or military dominance, you must disrupt it, co-opt it, or destroy it. Throughout the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union constantly maneuvered to control pipelines, ports, and trade routes, seeing them as extensions of their ideological and military power. The battle for influence in Central Asia, the great game of the 19th century, was replayed with oil and gas pipelines as the new railways, with each superpower seeking to steer the flow of energy in its favor. We see this dynamic playing out even now, in the 21st century. Today, China's Belt and Road Initiative is the spiritual successor to the Berlin-Baghdad Railway, but on a planetary scale. It is a colossal network of ports, pipelines, railways, and highways designed to connect China with the world, creating new economic corridors that bypass traditional, Western-controlled choke points. And just as London feared the Kaiser's railway a century ago, Washington now looks at the Belt and Road with deep suspicion. The language used is eerily similar. The project is described as a debt trap, a tool for strategic expansion, and a challenge to the established global order. The United States and its allies are actively working to create alternative infrastructure plans and using diplomatic and economic pressure to dissuade countries from joining China's project. The same fears and fault lines that defined the struggle over a single railway in the Ottoman Empire are now being projected onto a global map. The names and empires have changed, but the fundamental logic of geopolitics remains the same. The struggle to control the arteries of global trade is a constant and dangerous game where a line of steel on a map can be seen as an act of war and where the echoes of a train that was never fully built can still be heard in the conflicts of today.